What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Dolphins In Depth podcast. I'm Daniel Oyefusi. Thanks so much for tuning in. And I'm currently recording from my hotel room in Indianapolis. The host and the home of the NFL Scouting Combine landed in Indianapolis Monday night in preparation for the entire week of the Combine, talking to some of the top draft prospects, as well as Dolphins coach Mike McDaniel, who's scheduled to speak to reporters Wednesday afternoon. Pretty busy day for me on Tuesday. I'm sure you can see the bags under my eyes. Despite the prospects not working out yet, it was a pretty eventful day. I got a one-on-one interview with Mike McDaniel, which I was able to put up on the Miami Herald website. So if you want to check that out, there was a lot of really, really good content and good nuggets from McDaniel. You can check that out on the website. I'm also excited to share some of the audio as well if you weren't able to read it on the website. But first, I really want to get into this week, the NFL Scouting Combine. The Dolphins, as you all know, are picking number 29 overall after various series of trades. Their position is locked in, and now as they begin this week of evaluation, they're looking to see who they might pick with that slot. And really, I want to say as we enter this period, free agency starting in about a week or so. And then you have a bunch of transactions and moves. I think this is definitely an opportunity to take a step back and, really keep all options on the table and really to consider all options when it comes to who the Dolphins might eventually select with that number 29 overall pick. If they do decide to stay in that slot and pick, they very well could trade out of it or trade up, who knows. But again, I mean, this is a brand new regime with Mike McDaniel and his new coaches, his new coaching staff, working with Chris Grier. And really, I really do believe that everything's on the table. If you look at a lot of mock drafts that are, definitely premature, but it's still fun to kind of take a look at who the Dolphins might pick. It seems like the general consensus is that they're going to go in the offensive direction, and specifically offensive line, offensive tackle, or wide receiver. Those are definitely probably the team's two biggest needs. And if they were able to add an impact player at either of those positions, it go a long way to kind of turning around the fortunes of this team in the first year under McDaniel. But again, I really do see everything being on the table. Again, we still don't know what free agency holds for this team. We don't know what they're going to do with their own free agents. The two biggest names, as we've talked about the past couple of weeks, are Mike Gesicki and Emmanuel Ogbah. Those are two really, really big parts of the team. And if they're, to lose one or both of those guys, I mean, I think tight end potentially is an option at number 29, depending on, how some of these guys test. Defensive line is definitely a possible option with that top pick. The general consensus is that this isn't, the top end value. It's not what it's been in previous years. But I think there's going to be a lot of really, really good options at positions that you wouldn't say are big needs at around the number 29 range. But again, I do think that there's a good chance that, and I would hope that the Dolphins wouldn't necessarily pigeonhole themselves into saying, okay, we have to take an offensive tackle, we have to take a wide receiver. I think that there's definitely going to be a lot of really good options at various positions. And if the Dolphins want to take that best player available approach, I mean, there's definitely going to be a lot of really solid options there. But really, I mean, when you look at the various positions of need, again, just kind of breaking it down and looking at some of the prospects, I mean, I definitely do want to start with the offensive line. And this is a position that I was looking at back in the Senior Bowl when some of the top upperclassmen gathered in Mobile, and I was able to watch some of them. I think one name that came out to me, stood out to me was Daniel Faley, a really big offensive lineman, offensive tackle from Minnesota. I wrote about him in my preview a couple of days ago, kind of breaking down some of the prospects I think Dolphins fans should have their eyes on. And again, this guy's 6'9", so he's not going to be hard to miss in Indianapolis, working out, 6'9", 380 pounds, but has really good feet, moves really well. I think his performance in Mobile was kind of, up and down. You definitely saw the physical traits, but he's a raw kid in terms of him only playing football a couple of years, starting to play football a couple of years ago. So he's definitely somebody that needs development. I don't know if he's necessarily that plug and play player that the Dolphins probably need at the offensive tackle position. But if you look at somebody who has a really high ceiling, I don't know if you can go higher than him. I also think of a guy like Bernard Raymond, who, like Daniel Faley, started playing football a couple of years ago. But again, he's 6'7", 6'6", moves really well. And one thing that, is really needed in this zone running scheme that Mike McDaniel is looking to implement is people who can move around really well with the offensive line position. So you tend to see, and even talking with Matt Applebaum, the new Dolphins offensive line coach, he said that you definitely put a premium on speed, because you want somebody who can get out in space and get to their position to block defenders. So again, when you can kind of marry the size and the speed, 6'7", 6'8", 6'6", but also get somebody who moves really well and can get to their spots quickly, I think that's definitely a match made in heaven. And the last guy I'm definitely keeping my eye out for at the offensive line position is Zion Johnson, who actually was coached by Matt Applebaum, not only in Boston College, but in Davidson before he transferred to Boston College. So obviously there's familiarity there. He's one of the top interior offensive linemen in the draft. And, he impressed a lot of scouts by his willingness to take snaps at center. So, I mean, he's a guy where it seems like if you're looking for a plug and play guy, he's definitely the guy that you're looking for. Again, he's an interior offensive lineman, so he doesn't really solve the problem at tackle, which is really the Dolphins' greatest needed offensive line. But again, when you're talking about a guy that you can maybe plug in from day one and fill in and lock down a spot, I don't think that you'd find anybody within the Dolphins brass that's complaining about that. So I know a lot of Dolphins fans are really, really paying a lot of close attention on the offensive line these days. Those are some guys that, in terms of the day one 29th overall pick, I think that those are definitely options. But another position that I'm really looking at is wide receiver. Again, we know how much Jaylen Waddle kind of shouldered the load in terms of pass catching. You had Devontae Parker in and out of the lineup. Preston Williams not necessarily make the impact that many people thought. So you definitely would think that, wow, seems like it's going to be a run first offense and a run heavy offense. You definitely need to add more explosiveness next to Jaylen Waddle. And in a conference call last week, NFL Network draft analyst Daniel Jeremiah suggested that the Dolphins build a track team. Like he said, hey, Tua is really good at, the RPO slant. He said one thing that Tua will do is he'll slant you to death. And we saw that a lot in in this past season. Sometimes it wasn't as, productive as we would have hoped it would have been, but Tua is really, really good to run the slant pass. So Jeremiah thinks that, they should just get a bunch of speed demons and kind of try to make like a form of the Kansas City Chiefs. And I'm not opposed to that. I'm really not. One guy that he brought up who he thinks is going to be available with the 29th overall pick is Johan Dotson, a wide receiver from Penn State. He's about 5'11", 184. He thinks that Dotson's going to run in the 4.3 range. So again, if you're trying to look for a track team, that's perfect right there. I think one thing that really is beneficial about him is that while he might get that reputation for just being like a burner, being a guy that you just put in the slot because he's not over 6 feet or whatever, 200 pounds. He's played like inside and out. He's played all the various positions. And that's another thing that Jeremiah said. He thinks McDaniel was going to emphasize on this offense, guys that you can move around in different parts of the field so you can kind of make everything look the same. You don't want to kind of pigeonhole yourselves and put one guy in one spot and kind of give a tell to the defense to show what you're going to do. Again, he's a really good route runner, so he can play inside and outside. He can beat man coverage. So I think that he's a guy that I'd love to see in this offense. Another wide receiver who we mentioned, who I didn't write about because he's probably not going to be doing any testing, but is Jameson Williams, wide receiver from Alabama. Obviously that'd be a great storyline. Putting the two Alabama guys at wide receiver. Obviously he didn't play with Jaylen Waddle, but there's an Alabama connection there. Jameson is another guy who just he's a deep threat. We saw it a lot in Alabama before he tore his ACL, unfortunately, in college football playoffs. It's kind of one of those deals where if you draft him at 29, you're kind of doing it with the expectation that he's not going to be ready for the season. He might not be ready till the second half of the season, but it's kind of like you're playing the long game. And you know that, when he gets back on the field, or at least you hope that when he gets back on the field, he's really going to provide a lot of, dynamic play, a lot of speed. It's one of those situations where, again, he's not gonna test, he's not gonna be running the 40 because he's still in the middle of his rehab. But you definitely want to talk to him, kind of get a feel for where he's at physically, and kind of run those tests and kind of talk with your medical staff and come and see whether, the physical part checks out and whether you think he's going to be back to or back around where he was when he was in college. But again, if the medical side, if the physical side, the physical check out, your medical staff gives the green light, I think that's a steal. I mean, he's a guy who, he was, before the injury, he was talked about being, one of the first, if not the first wide receiver taken off the board. So for you to get like a top 15 value at number 29, I don't think you can ask for more if you're a Dolphins fan. So those are two guys at wide receiver that I'm looking at. But I want to switch to defense to kind of round out my list. Again, it seems like the offense is definitely what needs the most work on this team. But again, I don't think that you should count anything out at this point in terms of what position the Dolphins will target at number 29, because we just don't know what the makeup of this team is going to be. Even the coaching staff trying to put together playbooks. I talked to Mike McDaniel about it, and he said, he's taken steps towards crafting the playbook, but you just really can't get a real sense for like what you're going to run until you actually get the guys in the building and exactly who's going to be on your team for the upcoming season. The Dolphins have a ton of free agents. They have a ton of money. So this team most likely is going to look a lot different than it currently looks, March 1st when I'm recording this. It's going to look a lot different in the coming weeks and months. But again, on the defense side of the ball, I think that while this was a unit that was one of the league's best over the second half of the season when the Dolphins won, their last 8 of 9, this is still a defense that, could still use a little bit of tweaks. They could use some depth. They could use some impact players at spots. And really the first spot that I'm looking at is inside linebacker. We saw Jerome Baker play so well when he was moved to the outside. He's not as great against the run as, you maybe like him to be as an inside linebacker, but he blitzes really well. He can cover running backs in space. So, I think that inside linebacker, and I wrote about this, last week, it's kind of an underrated, position that can maybe get a major upgrade in the draft. I think there's a lot of guys on day 2, maybe even day 3, who have really, really intriguing skill sets and could present a really, really intriguing option for the Dolphins to take. One guy that I wrote about is Alabama's Christian Harris. He's kind of, in terms of size, he's definitely a lot bigger than Jerome Baker. He's 6'3", 250, 260. So he can definitely hold his own in the run. But he played in a pro-style defense at Alabama under Nick Saban. So he was asked to do a lot of the things that maybe he'd be asked to do in this defense that's going to be run by Josh Boyer in 2022. He was a 3-year starter at Alabama, so he has a lot of experience. He wasn't able to necessarily put it together in terms of being like one of the star players on the defense. He struggled with consistency, his awareness. But again, in terms of kind of the familiarity and, the ability to transition from, what was a pro style like offense defense at Alabama to, a pro style offense in Miami. I think that he's definitely a guy who has a skill set that would really, really complement Jerome Baker well. And the last guy I'm definitely keeping my eye out in terms of the linebacker spot on defense is Chad Mumma. He's a guy who, I've come to learn a lot more about in the past couple of weeks. He was at the Senior Bowl in Mobile last month. He had a really, really good showing there. And he's one of those guys who's like kind of like Josh Allen when he was coming out of Wyoming, the small school prospect, didn't have a ton of eyes on him, but he was just extremely, extremely productive. He was at the top of the league in tackles. He's a former converted safety. So he has a lot of those kind of coverage skills that you don't see out of a lot of linebackers. But he's big, he can kind of do it all. He's 6'2", 6'3", like Christian Harris, has a lot of size. and flies to the ball. You don't get all those tackles by accident. So he just has a nose for being around the ball. So again, at that inside linebacker spot, it's not about necessarily maybe getting like a star. There's a lot of talk about getting like the next Micah Parsons who can just do everything. I mean, it's really tough to find that. I mean, those guys are. Micah Parsons seems like a generational prospect, but for the Dolphins, it's about kind of like filling out the rest of that defense, and in terms of finding somebody that can complement Jerome Baker and maybe have him kind of play more on the outside where he's really thrived. I think those are some guys that can really, really provide an impact. And again, I think the Dolphins will have their eyes on a lot of prospects, not just the offensive linemen, not just the wide receivers, not just the offensive guys. There's definitely going to be a lot of options on the table at number 29. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds as the roster kind of comes into place with free agency and whatnot. So that brings us to the end of the first half of the pod. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, I'm going to share some clips from my interview with Mike McDaniel on Tuesday afternoon. Really appreciated his insight. He broke down some film with me. Then he answered a bunch of questions. We were talking Tua, we're talking Mike Gesicki, how he's adjusted to Miami, even threw in a little Tupac Biggie question because he's a big rap fan. So I really enjoyed this talk, and I'm excited to share some of that with you guys as well. So stay locked with us. What's going on, everybody? First half of the pod, I was sharing some of my thoughts on the NFL draft scouting combine, and just looking forward to talking to some prospects and kind of getting a look at the top prospects in this draft cycle. I teased it a little bit. If you haven't already read my Q&A with Mike McDaniel from Tuesday, definitely go to the Miami Herald, miamiherald.com, and check that out. But I definitely want to share some clips from that interview. Talked for 30 minutes with him, which I really appreciated the time. Again, the first half, we were breaking down a lot of film, which I'm really excited to put together for a story to coming out, date to be determined. But I'm really excited to kind of share his insight into the offense that he seeks to bring to Miami. But the second half of our talk was, just kind of all encompassing. We talked a lot about just what the past couple of weeks have been like for him, being introduced as head coach of the Dolphins, getting his staff, getting ready for free agency and the draft, and just everything the offseason entails, and really breaking down some players on the team and his vision for that, for those players, for the team, for just kind of trying to turn around this franchise as a whole. So I'm really excited to share some of these clips. So here we go. I'm sure all the days feel kind of blended together. But I guess so far, how has the job been like what you expected, and how has it maybe not been like what you expected? And I don't mean that in a negative way, just maybe something that you just didn't foresee.
Now, ironically, I went into it having I've gone into the job bearing witness to several peers being in the same situation. So I was afforded that experience, not on-job experience, but because of that, it's been pretty much what I've expected. And what I've expected is the unexpected.
Yeah.
And that's as literal as I could put it. But that's so every day you have an idea of what you want to get done, but you know that it could be derailed by something more pressing, and you just adjust on the fly. And I will say that type of mindset and just the energy that takes, I'm getting used to. At the end of the week, I'm more tired than I've been used to being, but I equate it to like in season weeks 1 through 3, you're always more tired than weeks 6 through whatever. So it's more rewarding in the short term than I could have necessarily expected. That's one thing you can't put yourself in. You can't really know the feeling of, what it feels like to have a good day at the office as a head coach. And we're 0-0, but if you approach every day with the right way, you should feel like there's wins in the off season. And those days, when I felt like I approached things the right way, and maybe handled a tough situation well, or even when I don't handle things well, but I feel like I'm supported in the building, working with all the special people I get to work with. Um, it feels it has been more fulfilling than I could have realized.
Obviously, it's been, you said the days blend together. It's been kind of a whirlwind. So you come in, you're introduced about a week or two later. You have your staff. Before you know it, I mean, I talked to some of the assistants, and they said, I'm getting ready for the combine. How have you balanced and kind of gone about not only evaluating the current roster, but obviously the draft prospects, and then even other players who might be available in free agency as that closely
No, it's a hard balance, but that's um, you're not the first, nor will be the last to do it. So you just try to do it to the best of your ability. But the first and foremost, I wanted to make sure that I was going to be relying heavily on all the coaches. So I dove full into that and made that a mission while trying to keep abreast of anything that was happening. And then you're just jumping in, and you don't feel comfortable having any downtime because you're trying to catch back up to the other teams. But I've been fortunate enough to. This is my 7th different team that I've been on, so I've been a part of. I know where you should kind of be at, and the tempo of stuff, and then I have a very very experienced GM that I work with on a day-to-day basis that um, I never feel overwhelmed with all that stuff because I know our working relationship. I trust him to the nth degree, and he's I don't have to be in 2 spots at once. He's righting the ship, and that communication really alleviates a lot of the potential anxiety. Feeling like, wow, you have to build Rome in one day. No, you don't.
Gotcha.
You just have to have good days' work stacked on top of each other.
So there's a lot of obvious intrigue in your offense. What are you like the scheme that you're going to bring in? I guess where are you in terms of kind of crafting that? Obviously, you want to blend it to fit the skills of your players, but like taking steps to do that. Where is that process? And obviously it's going to be really centered around Tua. Just what input would you expect him, and do you expect him to have as you go along that process?
We're in a good spot. Teaching the exact verbiage and the way we want to set our foundation of our language and our system to the players, which is all you really want to get to for OTAs and the off season, because people don't quite understand, but you're really teaching them a new language. I think this will be to a 6th different language in football that he's had, like in however many years to call it. So you want to refine that teaching mechanism, make sure all the coaches are on the same page with how you want to communicate and how you want to identify defenses, how you want to call formations and call protections and pass plays and run plays and all of that. And you just get a foundation set to a certain degree that allows you to grow within your skill set, within all your players, that you don't know your final product of 90-man roster until after the draft. So you're just leaving wiggle room, not making sure the foundation is set correctly so that you can emphasize the position specific details really, and then letting it go from there. Now, as far as feedback, it's more of a creating an atmosphere for easy dialogue that Tua is able to there'll be some stuff that we ask him that he hasn't done, and we'll be forthright with it, with like, hey, we should try this for a little while, because you don't want to just give a knee-jerk reaction. I don't like this. It's the first day. You want to train him at it, but then it's very, very important that he feels comfortable to communicate back to you, hey, I don't like this because of X.
Yeah.
After a given time of diving into that, that's where he'll be invaluable, because we want players to play their best. For them to play their best, they have to be confident in what they're trying to execute. So it's a balancing act between, you got to jump into it, see what headway you can make, but then you also need to be like, hey, coach, this is my jam, and then we'll adjust.
One last part I want to ask about, and it's Mike Gesicki. I know obviously he's a pending free agent, so I don't want to ask too much about what your plans and whatnot. But when you look at his skill set, he might have a reputation of not being a stellar blocker, and apparently there's a lot of importance on blocking, especially at the tight end position. Just big picture, what do you see his skill set and how it can kind of fit in this offense that you seek to bring?
Generally, I don't. Whether you call it optimist or the way I've always looked at players is I kind of identify what they can do, and less of what they can't. And there's some things about Mike's game that is very beneficial for an offense. There's a lot of stuff in the pass game that he's exceptional at. So I get why people talk that way. I do think he's a competitive player that is a team player. So there's multiple ways that we've used guys just like him, because everybody is involved in the run game, and he is capable of blocking. You just have to tailor everything that you do to your guys' given skill set to put them in good positions to succeed. So
I guess taking a step back, just how have you enjoyed the move to Miami? I mean, do you find yourself getting noticed by fans in public and whatnot? Just how have you enjoyed the entire move?
The Miami's awesome, man. I pictured that it was an exciting place, but I just it's kind of like putting a face to a name. Like, the people are really cool. There's a lot of culture down here. And there's just a lot of vibrance and enthusiasm. That's been awesome. I've been noticed more than I've been noticed in the past. But I guess being an only child, it kind of fit. I always thought people were noticing me, and I guess I'm just finding out now that most of my life they didn't. So it's to be expected. It's part of the job, part of what you sign up for. But there's a lot of new friends and handshakes and names that I'm trying to remember, but I know at some point I'm not going to remember everybody's.
Again, I really appreciate Mike McDaniel, setting aside some time ahead of, a really busy week to talk with me about just really anything I wanted. It was, everything was, on the table in terms of, breaking down film and just talking about his vision for the team. And I really appreciate the insight, and I hope you guys kind of learn some new stuff as well. Again, scheduled to speak to him Wednesday afternoon, currently recording this Tuesday night. So we're going to have a lot more content from his availability when he speaks to reporters, as well as a lot more content from this week at the NFL scouting combine, talking to draft prospects, whatever nuggets may come up, there's a bunch of executives, a bunch of coaches, a bunch of reporters all gathered here. So definitely a lot of talking about what's going on in the NFL. So we'll be reporting that as the week goes on. That brings us to the end of another edition of the Dolphins In Depth podcast. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. I keep on saying it's been a whirlwind process, from the firing of Brian Flores to the lawsuit to the team hiring Mike McDaniel to really moving forward with this new regime and this new vision for the team. I know it's been a lot to keep up with, but I've been happy to do that, and I hope that you guys have really been enjoying the coverage. So again, really looking forward to this week. I'll be back next week to talk more about my trip to Indy for the combine, as well as whatever is going on in the world of the Dolphins. But until then, you guys take care. Bye.